The apartment wasn't much, a cramped one-bedroom on the third floor of a converted Victorian in the heart of the city, but it was mine. Every piece of secondhand furniture, every carefully arranged book, every plant thriving on the narrow windowsill represented something my parents' mansion never offered, a place where I mattered. I was folding laundry when my phone buzzed against the kitchen counter. The caller ID made my stomach clench. Mother. I considered letting it ring, as I had so many times before, but guilt won out on the fourth ring. Suzeth, darling! Margaret Carter's voice carried that familiar tone of polished authority mixed with barely concealed impatience. I hope you're not too busy to spare time for family. Hello, Mother. I tucked the phone between my ear and shoulder, continuing to fold my work blouses. What do you need? Need? She laughed, but it sounded brittle. I don't need anything, sweetheart. I'm calling to invite you to dinner, Sunday evening. Your father has wonderful news about Daniel's latest business venture, and we thought it would be nice to celebrate as a family. Daniel's latest business venture, of course. I set down a half-folded shirt and closed my eyes, transported back to my 16th birthday. While I'd been upstairs studying for my AP chemistry exam, my parents had thrown Daniel an impromptu party in the backyard because he'd passed his driver's test on the second try. Through my bedroom window, I'd watched neighbors arrive with congratulations and gifts while my birthday cake sat forgotten on the kitchen counter. Suzeth, are you there? I'm here. I cleared my throat. Sunday is 7 o'clock. Don't be late. And please, wear something nice. You know how your father values presentation? The line went dead before I could respond. I stared at the phone, feeling that familiar cocktail of anger and longing that always accompanied contact with my family. At 25, I should have been immune to their casual dismissal, but the little girl who'd once waited by the window for parents who never came to her school plays still lived somewhere inside me. My reflection in the bathroom mirror showed the same determined face that had gotten me through years of being overlooked. Dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, intelligent hazel eyes that missed nothing, and a jawline that suggested I wouldn't back down from a fight. I'd learned early that crying got you nowhere in the Carter household. Results were all that mattered. Unless you were Daniel, in which case just showing up earned you a standing ovation. Sunday evening arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made the city feel alive. I'd chosen my outfit carefully, a navy blazer over dark jeans and boots, professional enough to show I took care of myself, casual enough to signal I wasn't trying to impress anyone. The 20-minute bus ride to Riverside Heights gave me time to steel myself for what awaited. The Carter family mansion sat on 2 manicured acres, its federal-style architecture screaming old money, despite the fact that my parents had bought it only 10 years ago. Richard Carter, my father, had clawed his way up from a working-class background to build his construction and development empire, but he wore his success like armor against anyone who might question his legitimacy. Margaret answered the door in her signature pearls and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Suzeth, there you are. You look practical. Hello, Mother. I followed her through the marble-floored entryway, past oil paintings of ancestors we weren't actually related to, and into the dining room where crystal and china awaited. Daniel was already there, of course, holding court at the head of the table while my father beamed with pride. At 22, my younger brother had inherited Richard's commanding presence and Margaret's effortless charm, plus an unshakable confidence that came from never having to prove himself worthy of love.
The prodigal daughter returns. Daniel raised his wineglass in mock salute. How's life in the trenches, sis? Still playing social worker? I worked as a project manager for affordable housing initiatives. Hardly playing and hardly social work, but correcting Daniel had long since proven pointless. It's rewarding work. I'm sure it is. Richard's voice carried the subtle condescension I remembered from childhood. Though I've never understood why you insist on working for peanuts when you could have a real position with the company. A real position. Translation, a job where I could be grateful for their charity while Daniel learned the business he'd inevitably inherit. I'd stopped explaining years ago that I wanted to build something meaningful, not just profitable. As dinner progressed, the conversation flowed around me like I was invisible furniture. Daniel regaled everyone with stories of his latest real estate acquisition, something about converting old warehouses into luxury condos. The numbers he threw around were impressive, but something felt off about his casual dismissal of construction timelines and safety inspections. The key, Daniel said, gesturing with his fork, is knowing which corners you can cut without anyone noticing. Dad taught me that. Margaret nodded approvingly while I caught a glimpse of something that looked almost like worry cross Richard's features. But it was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. When the evening finally ended, I declined their offer of a ride home and waited for the bus under a streetlight. The autumn wind cut through my jacket, but I welcomed the cold. It felt more honest than the artificial warmth of the mansion where love came with conditions I'd never managed to meet. As the city lights blurred past the bus window, Daniel's words echoed in my mind, knowing which corners you can cut without anyone noticing. Something about his confidence troubled me more than his usual arrogance. I'd spent so many years trying to earn their approval that I'd almost forgotten how to trust my instincts. But sitting there in the rumbling bus, surrounded by working people heading home to families who actually saw them, I felt something stir inside me. Maybe it was time to stop being invisible. Maybe it was time to start noticing the things they hoped no one would see. 3 weeks later, Margaret's voice crackled through my phone again, this time with genuine excitement instead of her usual measured politeness. "Suzeth, you simply must come to dinner this Friday. Daniel has the most wonderful news about the Riverside Development Project. Your father is beside himself with pride." I pressed my fingers to my temples, already feeling the familiar headache that accompanied family gatherings. What kind of news? "Oh, I won't spoil the surprise, but let's just say our boy has exceeded everyone's expectations. 7:30 sharp. And Suzeth, this is important to your father. Please don't disappoint him." The line went dead before I could decline. Friday evening found me back on the bus to Riverside Heights, watching the neighborhoods transform from working-class row houses to manicured estates. The contrast always struck me, how quickly the city could shift from struggle to prosperity, sometimes within a single block. This time, the mansion practically glowed with celebration. Extra cars filled the circular driveway, and I recognized several luxury vehicles belonging to Richard's business associates. Through the tall windows, I could see figures in expensive suits mingling in the living room, champagne glasses catching the light from the crystal chandelier. Margaret greeted me at the door wearing a black cocktail dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. "Perfect timing! Daniel is just about to make his announcement." She ushered me into the living room, where 20-some guests had gathered around Daniel, who stood near the fireplace like he was holding court. Richard beamed nearby, his chest puffed with paternal pride. I recognized several faces from the city's development scene, contractors, city council members, and investors who moved in the same circles as my father.
And that's why I'm thrilled to announce that the Riverside Warehouse District project has officially broken ground, ahead of schedule and under budget, Daniel was saying, raising his champagne flute. 200 luxury units, premium retail space, and a 15% higher profit margin than initially projected. The room erupted in applause. Richard stepped forward to embrace his golden child, and I watched Daniel's face glow with the kind of unconditional approval I'd spent my entire life craving. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard's voice commanded the room's attention, "this is what happens when vision meets execution. My son has proven that the next generation of Carter development isn't just ready to lead, they're already surpassing the previous one." More applause, more champagne, more glowing smiles. I found myself pushed toward the back of the crowd, invisible as usual, but my mind was working overtime. I'd driven past the Riverside Warehouse District just last week on my way to a housing advocacy meeting. The construction site had looked barely touched, certainly not ready for the kind of progress Daniel was claiming. "Ahead of schedule?" I found myself asking during a brief lull in conversation. Daniel's eyes found mine across the room, his smile tightening slightly.
That's right, sis. Sometimes experience trumps textbook theory. It's just that I was in that area recently, and the site looked— Suzeth, Richard's voice cut through mine with sharp precision. I don't think Daniel needs construction advice from someone whose expertise lies in— what was it? Low-income housing applications? Laughter rippled through the crowd, polite but pointed. My cheeks burned, but I pressed on. I'm just curious about the timeline. Breaking ground to occupancy ready in 18 months seems aggressive. Absolutely. Daniel moved closer, his charm cranked up to full wattage. But that's what separates the Carter family from our competition. We don't waste time on excessive safety protocols and bureaucratic red tape. We get results. Something cold settled in my stomach. Excessive safety protocols? Daniel means we're efficient, Margaret interjected smoothly, appearing at my elbow with practiced grace. Darling, why don't you let me introduce you to the Hendersons? They've just moved back from Europe, and I think you'd find their charity work fascinating. But I was watching Daniel now, really watching him. The way his eyes darted away when I asked direct questions, the slight sheen of sweat on his forehead despite the cool evening air, the too quick cadence of his speech when explaining technical details. As the evening wore on, I found myself observing rather than participating. The guests hung on Daniel's every word as he described cost-cutting measures and accelerated construction schedules. He spoke with the confidence of someone who'd never been questioned, but I caught the moments when his explanations didn't quite add up. The secret is knowing which inspections are truly necessary, he told a group of investors near the bar. Half of these city requirements are just bureaucrats justifying their salaries. Smart contractors know how to prioritize what actually matters. I was nursing a glass of water in the corner when I noticed Maria, one of the catering staff, looking exhausted as she cleared empty plates. She'd been working steadily for 3 hours without a break, and I could see the strain in her shoulders as she balanced heavy trays. "Can I help you with anything?" I asked quietly as she passed. She looked startled, glancing nervously toward Margaret before shaking her head. "No, miss, thank you, but no." But I caught the way she winced when lifting a tray of crystal glasses, favoring her left wrist, and I noticed how the other staff members moved with the careful efficiency of people who knew they couldn't afford to make mistakes. "Maria, right?" I kept my voice low. "How long have you been working for my parents?" 2 years, miss. Good job. Good family to work for."
The words sounded rehearsed, but her eyes told a different story. They held the same weariness I'd seen in too many faces at the housing advocacy meetings, the look of people working too hard for too little, afraid to complain because they couldn't afford to lose what they had. "Suzeth!" Richard's booming voice made both Maria and me jump. "Come meet the Johnsons. They're thinking of investing in Daniel's next project." As I was pulled back into the social circus, I caught Maria's grateful nod before she disappeared into the kitchen. But something had shifted in my perspective. The gleaming mansion, the expensive champagne, the backslapping celebration, all of it suddenly felt built on shaky foundations. Daniel was still holding court, but now I heard something different in his voice. The casual dismissal of safety protocols, the jokes about cutting corners, the way he brushed off questions about worker conditions with a laugh and a wave. When the evening finally ended and I found myself waiting for the last bus of the night, Daniel's words kept echoing in my mind. Smart contractors know how to prioritize what actually matters. The question that haunted me during the long ride home was simple. What if what mattered to Daniel and what mattered to the people building his luxury condos were two entirely different things? And what if my perfect golden brother wasn't quite as perfect as everyone believed? The bus pulled away from Riverside Heights, carrying me back to my modest neighborhood where people worked honest jobs for honest wages. But for the first time in years, I found myself genuinely worried about my family's business. Not because I cared about the reputation, but because I was starting to suspect that reputation might be built on something much more dangerous than simple favoritism. The doubts that started at Daniel's celebration dinner grew stronger over the following weeks, nagging at me like a persistent headache.
I found myself taking different routes through the city, deliberately passing the Riverside Warehouse District construction site. Each time, the reality contradicted Daniel's triumphant claims. The site looked barely touched. A few foundation holes, some scattered equipment, and crews that seemed to work in sporadic bursts rather than the round-the-clock schedule Daniel had boasted about. More troubling were the workers themselves. Even from a distance, I could see the exhaustion in their movements, the way they hunched their shoulders against more than just the autumn cold. It was on a Thursday morning, riding the number 47 bus to my own job, when I first heard the conversation that changed everything. Two men in work clothes sat 3 rows ahead of me, their voices carrying over the engine noise. One was middle-aged, with calloused hands wrapped around a thermos of coffee. The other was younger, maybe early 20s, with paint-stained jeans and worry lines that seemed too deep for his age. They're saying we might not see paychecks until next month. Something about cash flow adjustments. Cash flow adjustments? The older man spat the words like they tasted bitter. That's what they called it last time, too. Meanwhile, the boss man's kid drives around in a BMW talking about profit margins. My blood chilled. The boss man's kid. They had to be talking about Daniel. My wife's pregnant, the younger worker continued. We can't lead another month from money we already earned. I put in 60 hours last week on that Riverside project, and they're telling me the pay schedule got adjusted because of permit delays. Permit delays? The older man shook his head. Funny how there's always money for fancy dinners and champagne toasts, but never enough to pay the guys actually swinging hammers. I pulled out my phone and quickly searched for public records on the Riverside Warehouse District project. What I found made my stomach drop. The permits Daniel had blamed for delayed payments? They'd been approved 3 weeks ago. The city record showed Carter Development had received all necessary clearances ahead of schedule.
So why were workers being told their paychecks were delayed because of permit issues? That evening, I called Jasmine Rivera, my best friend since college, and the only person who truly understood my complicated relationship with my family. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright with the energy that had gotten her through law school and into a position as a public defender. Suzeth, please tell me you're calling with good news. I need a break from deadbeat defendants and overworked prosecutors. I need to ask you something about employment law, I said without preamble. Uh-oh. I could practically hear her sitting up straighter. This is about your family, isn't it? What did they do now? I told her about the bus conversation, about Daniel's contradictory claims, about the permit records that didn't match the excuses being given to workers. Jasmine listened without interrupting, which meant she was taking it seriously. Suzeth, she said when I finished, what you're describing sounds like wage theft. If they're withholding already earned pay while claiming permit delays that don't exist, that's fraud. But they're my family. The words came out automatically, a reflexive defense I'd been programmed with since childhood. Your family who treats you like an afterthought except when they need someone to admire their questionable business practices? Jasmine's voice was gentle but firm. Honey, you don't owe them loyalty when they're potentially hurting people. After hanging up, I spent the night staring at my laptop screen, diving deeper into public records. Carter Development's recent filings painted a picture of aggressive expansion and impressive profits. But the more I dug, the more questions arose. Contracts that seemed deliberately vague about safety standards, subcontractor agreements that shifted liability away from Carter Development in ways that seemed designed to dodge responsibility rather than ensure quality. The breakthrough came when I found the OSHA complaint database, 3 separate safety violations at Carter Development sites in the past 6 months, all dismissed after what the records called corrective consultations. No fines, no follow-up inspections, just quiet resolutions that kept everything out of the public eye. I cross-referenced the dates with Daniel's social media posts. On the same day workers filed a complaint about unsafe scaffolding conditions, Daniel had posted a photo from an expensive restaurant with the caption, celebrating another successful week in the family business, #blessed, #success, #work hard. The contrast made me physically nausea. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The next morning, I found myself walking past the Riverside construction site during my lunch break. This time, I stopped and really looked. The safety equipment was minimal.
Hard hats, but no safety harnesses for workers on scaffolding. The electrical setups looked jury-rigged, and the workers moved with the careful caution of people who knew they were taking risks but couldn't afford to refuse the work. "Excuse me," I called to one of the workers near the fence. He was about my age with kind eyes and a wariness that reminded me of Maria from the dinner party. "Yeah? I'm sorry to bother you, but I'm working on a housing advocacy project, and I was wondering about working conditions in construction. Are you comfortable here? Safe?" His expression immediately shuddered. "Who's asking?" "Just someone who cares about workers' rights." He glanced around nervously, then stepped closer to the fence. "Look, lady, I need this job. We all do. But if you're really asking," he lowered his voice, "this site cuts corners. We know it, they know it, but they also know we can't afford to complain." "What kind of corners?" "Safety inspections that happen after we've already fixed the problems, equipment that should be replaced but gets repaired instead, overtime that gets recorded as regular hours so they don't have to pay time and a half, and paychecks that mysteriously get delayed whenever workers start asking too many questions."
My heart pounded. "Have you considered filing complaints?" He laughed bitterly. "With who? The guys who approve the permits are buddies with the guys who own the company. This is how business gets done around here." As I walked away, my phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. "Darling, don't forget Sunday dinner. Your father has exciting news about Daniel's promotion to project manager." I stared at the message for a long moment, then looked back at the construction site where men were risking their safety to build Daniel's vision of success. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel invisible in relation to my family. I felt something much more dangerous, responsible. Marcus Hale's office occupied a cramped corner of the city's alternative weekly newspaper, The Guardian Voice. The walls were covered with framed articles exposing corporate malfeasance, photos with whistleblowers, and a corkboard dense with red string connecting photographs like a detective's conspiracy theory. The man himself was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 30s, with intelligent dark eyes and the kind of focused intensity that made you feel like he was cataloging every word you said. "You're here about Carter Development," he said before I'd even introduced myself. It wasn't a question. "How did you—" "Your name is Suzeth Gordon. You work in affordable housing advocacy, and you called yesterday saying you had information about construction industry corruption." He gestured to a chair across from his cluttered desk. "Plus, you have the same jawline as Daniel Carter. Family resemblance is hard to hide." Heat flooded my cheeks. "I'm not here because of family drama." "Aren't you?" Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying me with the detached curiosity of someone who'd heard every sob story in the book. "Look, Ms. Gordon, I've been investigating your father's company for 8 months. Every time I get close to something substantial, witnesses suddenly become unavailable, documents get sealed, or complaints mysteriously disappear. So forgive me if I'm skeptical when the CEO's daughter shows up with promises of inside information." I pulled out my laptop and opened the files I'd compiled. These are public records showing permit approvals that contradict the excuses being given to workers for delayed wages. These are OSHA complaints that were dismissed without proper investigation. And this, I turned the screen toward him, is testimony from workers about safety violations and wage theft. He leaned forward, his skepticism shifting to genuine interest as he scanned the documents. "Where did you get the worker testimonies?" "I talked to them directly, at the Riverside construction site." "Jesus." He looked up sharply. "Do you have any idea how dangerous that was? If your family finds out you're investigating them, they won't find out. They barely notice I exist unless they need someone to tolerate Daniel's ego at dinner parties." The bitterness in my voice surprised even me. Something in Marcus's expression softened. "This isn't about getting back at mommy and daddy for favoring your brother." The question hit like a slap. I closed my laptop and stood up. "You know what? This was a mistake. I thought you actually cared about exposing corruption, but apparently you're more interested in psychoanalyzing sources than protecting workers." "Sit down." His voice was firm, but not unkind. I needed to ask that question because motivation matters. If this is revenge masquerading as justice, it'll fall apart the moment things get difficult, and they will. I remained standing, arms crossed. "And if it's not revenge? Then you're potentially handing me the biggest labor rights story of the year." He gestured back to the chair.
but I need to understand who you are before I decide whether to trust what you're bringing me. I sat back down, but kept my posture defensive. What do you want to know? Start with why you care. You could have stayed in your lane, enjoyed whatever privileges come with being Richard Carter's daughter, and ignored what happens to construction workers. Why didn't you?
The question forced me to articulate something I'd been feeling but hadn't fully examined. Because I know what it's like to be invisible to people who should care about you. I've spent my whole life watching my parents choose money and status over actual human worth. I won't be complicit in them doing the same thing to workers who have families to feed. Marcus nodded slowly. And you understand that exposing this could destroy your relationship with your family permanently. What relationship? I laughed, but it came out hollow. They see me as a disappointment who chose social work over profit margins. They tolerate me at family dinners because it looks bad to completely disown your daughter. There's a difference between being the family disappointment and being the family traitor. Marcus's voice was gentle but direct. Once we publish this story, there's no going back. Your father will know you provided the information. Your brother will know you destroyed his reputation. Your mother will know you chose strangers over family. Are you prepared for that? I thought about the worker at the construction site, about the fear in his eyes when he told me about safety violations, about Maria wincing as she lifted heavy trays while my family celebrated profits built on her exhaustion, about the men on the bus worried about feeding their families while Daniel bought BMWs with money earned from their unpaid labor. Yes, I said quietly. I'm prepared for that. Marcus studied my face for a long moment, then pulled out a legal pad. All right, let's start from the beginning. Tell me everything you know about Carter Development's business practices. And don't leave anything out because you think it makes your family look bad. That's exactly what we need. For the next 2 hours, I laid out everything I'd discovered. Marcus took detailed notes, asked probing questions, and occasionally whistled low under his breath when I described particularly egregious violations. This is substantial, he said finally, reviewing his notes. But we'll need more than public records and worker testimony. We need internal documents, financial records, communication between your father and the contractors who are actually implementing these cost-cutting measures. How do we get those? Marcus looked at me seriously. It depends how far you're willing to go to expose the truth. The question hung in the air between us, heavy with implications I wasn't sure I was ready to face. But as I thought about the workers risking their safety for my family's profit margins, the answer became clear. As far as necessary. The coffee shop where Marcus and I met 3 days later buzzed with the comfortable anonymity of a place where freelancers worked on laptops and students crammed for exams. We'd chosen a corner table away from windows, and Marcus had arrived early to scope out exit routes, a precaution that seemed paranoid until I realized how serious this had become. I've been making calls about Carter Development. What I found is worse than we thought. Inside were photocopied documents, handwritten notes, and printed emails that made my chest tighten with each page. Worker compensation claims that had been denied on technicalities, safety inspection reports that contradicted the violations I'd witnessed, and financial records showing a pattern of cost overruns being passed down to subcontractors who then squeezed workers to maintain profit margins. This email thread is particularly damning. Marcus pointed to a series of exchanges between Daniel and a subcontractor named Tony Breslin. Your brother is essentially instructing him to find creative solutions to labor costs on the Riverside project.
Breslin's response was more direct. Understood. We'll adjust overtime calculations and extend completion deadlines to reduce crew sizes. The crew chiefs know to keep worker complaints internal. Keep worker complaints internal, I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. They're systematically silencing people. It gets worse. Marcus flipped to another document. I found 3 workers who were willing to talk off the record. All of them described a culture of intimidation. Anyone who complains about safety violations or missing wages gets labeled a troublemaker and suddenly finds their hours cut or their contracts terminated. One testimonial made my hands shake as I read it. Rosa Martinez,
single mother, worked on Carter Development's East Side project. When she reported faulty electrical work that could have electrocuted someone, she was told her position had been eliminated due to budget constraints. She's been unemployed for 2 months. Another. James Chen, experienced carpenter, filed a formal complaint about workers being required to use damaged equipment. The next week, he was written up for attitude problems and eventually fired for performance issues that had never been mentioned before. These people are losing their livelihoods for trying to stay safe, I said, feeling nauseous. And your brother knows exactly what's happening. Marcus pulled out his laptop and showed me a spreadsheet. I cross-referenced the complaint dates with Carter Development's profit reports. Every time worker complaints spike, their profit margins somehow improve. It's not coincidence, it's strategy. I stared at the numbers, seeing my family's success in an entirely new light. Every family dinner where Richard praised Daniel's business acumen, every celebration of increased profits, every toast to the Carter family legacy, all of it built on this systematic exploitation of people who just wanted to work honestly and go home safely to their families. There's something else, Marcus said quietly. I reached out to OSHA about those dismissed safety complaints. Off the record, an inspector told me that Carter Development has connections with city officials who can make problems disappear. Your father has been cultivating these relationships for years. Corruption all the way up the chain. Institutional corruption, which means exposing this isn't just about one company. It's about a whole system designed to protect businesses that exploit workers. I thought about Maria again, about her careful words and nervous glances, about the construction worker who'd risked his job just to tell me the truth, about families struggling to pay rent while their employers celebrated record profits. What do we need to make this airtight? I asked. Marcus leaned forward. Internal communications, financial records that show the direct connection between worker exploitation and profit margins, testimony from someone inside the company who can confirm this is intentional policy, not just negligent management. Someone inside the company. I met his eyes. You mean me? I mean someone with access to executive-level communications, board meeting minutes, strategic planning documents, the kind of evidence that proves this goes beyond a few bad subcontractors. My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. Don't forget about Sunday dinner, darling. Richard wants to discuss Daniel's new role overseeing all construction projects. Such exciting news. I showed Marcus the message. Daniel's getting promoted. More projects. More workers under his supervision. More victims, Marcus said grimly. I stared at my mother's cheerful words, thinking about all the families who would suffer while my parents celebrated Daniel's expanded authority. The weight of what I was contemplating settled on my shoulders like a lead blanket. If I do this, if I get you internal documents, there's no pretending it was an anonymous tip or public information. They'll know it came from me.
Yes, Marcus said simply, and once we publish, you'll be choosing those workers' safety over your family's reputation, permanently. I closed my eyes, seeing Rosa Martinez's face from the testimonial photo, seeing the exhaustion in Maria's shoulders, seeing the fear in the construction worker's eyes when he'd risked speaking to me. Then I guess I know what choice I have to make. Sunday dinner at the Carter mansion felt different this time. Maybe it was knowing what I now knew, or maybe it was the decision I'd already made, but the opulent dining room seemed to mock every worker whose wages had paid for the crystal chandelier above our heads. Daniel held court as usual, regaling the table with stories of his promotion to director of construction operations. Richard beamed with paternal pride while Margaret hung on every word, occasionally interjecting with how proud she was of our boy's vision and leadership. The board was unanimous, Daniel said, cutting into his perfectly prepared steak. They said my innovative approach to cost management and timeline efficiency makes me the obvious choice to oversee all major projects. Innovative approach,
I repeated, my voice carefully neutral. Can you tell me more about that? Daniel's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Just smart business, sis. Finding ways to eliminate waste and maximize productivity. What kind of waste? Richard's laugh boomed across the table. Suzeth, always the little analyst. Daniel means bureaucratic inefficiencies, unnecessary delays, the kind of red tape that keeps projects from reaching their potential. Like safety inspections? I asked. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Margaret's smile became strained, while Daniel exchanged a quick glance with Richard. Safety is always our top priority, Daniel said smoothly, but some inspections are just formalities that delay progress without adding real value. And worker compensation? Are those formalities too? Suzeth, Margaret's voice carried a warning. What's brought on this sudden interest in construction details? I set down my fork and looked directly at Daniel. I'm interested in how you've managed to increase profit margins by 15% while completing projects ahead of schedule. It's impressive math. Daniel's confident smile flickered. We've streamlined operations. By extending work hours without overtime pay? That's not... Daniel started, then caught himself. Where are you getting this information? From workers on your projects. I watched his face carefully. They have some interesting stories about creative scheduling and flexible compensation structures. Richard's face had turned dark red. Suzeth, I don't know what kind of propaganda you've been listening to, but... Dad, I've seen the OSHA complaints, the ones that mysteriously get dismissed without proper investigation. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to the documented violations Marcus had shown me. 3 separate safety incidents in 6 months, all swept under the rug. Those were resolved through proper channels, Daniel said, but his voice had lost its earlier confidence. Proper channels that include city officials you play golf with? Margaret stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. That's enough. Suzeth, I don't know what's gotten into you, but you're being incredibly disrespectful to your family. Am I? Or am I finally asking the question someone should have asked years ago? You're attacking your own family based on rumors and gossip. After everything we've built, everything we've achieved, you want to tear it down because some disgruntled workers fed you sob stories? Some disgruntled workers like Rosa Martinez, who got fired for reporting electrical hazards that could have killed someone, or James Chen, who lost his job for refusing to use damaged equipment?
Daniel went pale. How do you know those names? Because I care enough to listen when people tell me they're being hurt by decisions you make from your corner office. Those were personnel decisions based on performance issues, Daniel said quickly. If they told you something different, they're lying. Really? Because I have documentation showing their complaints were filed days before their performance issues were suddenly discovered. Margaret stepped between us, her composure cracking. Suzeth, stop this right now. These people you're defending, they don't care about you. They don't care about this family. They're using you. The way you've used me, the words came out harder than I intended, as a convenient audience for Daniel's achievements, as someone to tolerate at family dinners so you can pretend we're a loving family? How dare you? Richard's voice was dangerously quiet. After everything we've provided for you, this is how you repay us? By attacking your own brother with malicious accusations? Everything you've provided? I laughed bitterly. You mean the college fund you spent on Daniel's modeling portfolio? The attention you gave him while ignoring my achievements? The love you made conditional on staying silent about inconvenient truths? Daniel slammed his hand on the table. Enough. You've always been jealous, Suzeth. Jealous that I was chosen to carry on the family legacy while you got stuck in your little charity job? Chosen? I stared at him. Daniel, you were handed everything on a silver platter while I had to fight for scraps of approval. And now I find out that silver platter was paid for with workers' safety and stolen wages?
"You don't understand business," Richard said coldly. "You never have. Construction is a competitive industry that requires tough decisions. Tough decisions like intimidating workers who report safety violations, like systematically cheating people out of overtime pay, like protecting the company that employs hundreds of people and supports this family, like maintaining relationships that keep us competitive." Maintaining relationships, I repeated. "You mean corruption." The silence that followed was deafening. Richard's face had gone from red to white, and I could see something dangerous building behind his eyes. "You want to know about tough decisions? Here's one. Family loyalty. Either you're part of this family or you're not. Either you support what we've built or you tear it down. But you don't get to do both." I looked around the table at the three people who should have loved me unconditionally, at the parents who taught me that worth was measured in profit margins, at the brother who'd been handed everything while workers suffered for his success. "Then I guess I know which choice I'm making," I said quietly. I walked out of that dining room knowing I'd never be welcome back, but for the first time in my life, I felt like I was finally choosing the right side. The community center in East District hummed with nervous energy on Tuesday evening. Fluorescent lights flickered over folding chairs arranged in a rough circle where 24 construction workers had gathered for what the flyer euphemistically called a workers' safety discussion group. The reality was more pointed. These were people preparing to fight Carter development in court. I sat in the back corner, my hands wrapped around a styrofoam cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. Marcus had connected me with Elena Vasquez, a labor organizer who'd been building a case against Carter development for months. What I hadn't expected was to see familiar faces in the crowd. Maria, the catering worker from my parents' dinner parties, sat 3 rows ahead of me. When our eyes met, her surprise quickly shifted to something that looked like hope. "Thank you all for coming," Elena said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd fought these battles before. "I know it's scary to be here. I know some of you are worried about retaliation, but silence protects them, not us."
A man in paint-stained work clothes raised his hand. "My wife keeps telling me to keep my head down. We can't afford for me to lose this job." "We can't afford not to fight," said a woman with calloused hands and determined eyes. "My husband fell off scaffolding last month because the safety harnesses were damaged. Carter Development's insurance denied the claim, said it was his fault for not properly securing equipment that was already broken." The stories that followed painted a picture that was even worse than what Marcus and I had documented. Workers forced to choose between safety and employment, families going without medical care because workplace injuries were blamed on worker negligence, children whose parents came home exhausted and demoralized, too afraid to speak up about dangerous conditions. When Elena asked for volunteers to testify in the pending lawsuit, the room fell silent. I understood their fear. These people were risking everything just by being here. "I'll testify," I said, my voice cutting through the quiet. 24 pairs of eyes turned toward me. Elena looked confused, checking her list of attendees. "I'm sorry, I don't think we've met. Are you a Carter Development employee?" "I'm Suzeth Gordon, and Richard Carter is my father." The reaction was immediate. Whispers, suspicious glances, a few people shifting toward the exit. Maria's face went pale. "It's okay," Elena said quickly, raising her hands for calm. "Ms. Gordon contacted me through Marcus Hale. She's been helping with our investigation." "Helping how?" The man in paint-stained work clothes had suspicion written across his face. "By spying on us for Daddy?" "By gathering evidence against her own family," Elena replied firmly. "She's the one who provided the internal emails showing systematic wage theft." The room buzzed with murmurs. I could feel their uncertainty, their need to trust warring with years of being betrayed by people in power. "Why should we believe you?" asked the woman whose husband had been injured. "You grew up in their mansion while we struggled to pay rent." The question hit like a physical blow, but it was fair. "Because you're right to be suspicious. I did grow up privileged while you suffered. I ate dinner off china bought with money stolen from your paychecks. I should have seen what was happening years ago." I took a breath, looking around the circle of skeptical faces. "I can't undo that blindness, but I can use the access my family name gives me to get the evidence that will hold them accountable. The question is whether you'll let me help, even though I don't deserve your trust." An older man with gray hair and kind eyes spoke up. "What kind of evidence?" "Internal financial records showing the direct connection between worker exploitation and profit margins. Board meeting minutes where they discuss strategies for avoiding labor law compliance. Communications that prove this isn't incompetence, it's policy." "And how exactly do you plan to get those documents?" Elena asked. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "Suzeth, we need to talk. Family meeting tomorrow at the office. Dad wants to discuss your concerns about the business. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." I showed the message to Elena. "They want to bring me into the office, probably to threaten me, maybe to offer some kind of deal to keep me quiet." "That's dangerous," Marcus said from across the room. I hadn't noticed him arrive. "If they suspect you're gathering evidence, they could destroy documents or worse." Maria stood up suddenly, her voice shaky but determined. "I work catering for their events, sometimes in the office building. I could help." "Maria, no," I said immediately. "You can't risk your job." "My job?" She laughed bitterly. "Miss Gordon, they already treat us like we're invisible. Maybe that's our advantage." Elena leaned forward. "What are you thinking?"
The office building has a big charity gala next Friday. All the executives will be there, including Mr. Richard and Daniel. They always hire extra catering staff for those events. Maria's voice grew stronger as she spoke. Someone could access offices while everyone's distracted. "Someone like me," I said, understanding immediately. "With me providing access and cover," Maria added. "If we're caught, I can say I was showing you where the bathrooms are." The room had gone completely quiet. These people were watching a pampered rich girl and an underpaid catering worker plan to burglarize one of the city's most powerful development companies. "It's too risky," the gray-haired man said finally. "If you get caught, they'll destroy you both and claim the documents were falsified." "If we don't try," Maria replied, "more people get hurt. My cousin works on the new Riverside expansion. Daniel Carter just announced they're cutting safety inspections to meet their deadline." I looked around the circle of faces, tired, worried, but increasingly hopeful. These people had spent years being powerless, while my family grew richer off their suffering. Now they were offering to risk what little they had to help me expose the truth. "I'm in," I said, "but I want everyone here to understand. If we do this, there's no guarantee it will work. And if it does work, the fallout will be severe." "More severe than watching our family suffer while rich people celebrate?" asked the injured worker's wife. I met her eyes, thinking of all the family dinners where I'd sat silent while Daniel bragged about his success. No, nothing could be more severe than that. Friday evening, the Carter Development Building gleamed against the darkening sky, its lobby transformed into an elegant reception space for the annual Building Tomorrow's Community Charity Gala. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see my parents mingling with the city's elite, champagne glasses catching the light as they celebrated their philanthropic generosity with money earned some exploited workers. I stood across the street, wearing the black slacks and white shirt of the catering staff, my hands trembling as I checked my phone. 8:47 p.m. Maria would be finishing the appetizer service soon, which meant security would be focused on the ground floor while the executives were distracted by dinner and speeches. My earpiece crackled with Marcus's voice from his position in the coffee shop 2 blocks away. "All clear from my end, no unusual security activity." "Remember," I whispered, "if anything goes wrong, abort immediately. The documents aren't worth anyone getting hurt." "Actually, they are," Maria's voice came through clearly, transmitted from the small mic clipped inside her uniform collar. "I just overheard Daniel telling a city councilman that the new Riverside expansion will house 800 families by Christmas. That's impossible, unless they're cutting every corner imaginable. My stomach clenched. 800 families depending on Daniel's reckless construction practices? I'm going in, I said, crossing the street with forced confidence. The building's back entrance buzzed me through. Maria had propped it open during her cigarette break, a perfectly normal action that wouldn't raise suspicion. The service elevator carried me to the executive floor in silence, my heart hammering against my ribs. The hallway was eerily quiet, illuminated only by emergency lighting. Daniel's corner office lay at the end of the corridor, its glass walls offering a view of the city skyline and the construction sites that had made our family wealthy. "I'm in Daniel's office," I whispered, pulling out the USB drive Marcus had given me. "How much time do I have?" "Dinner service just started. Richard is giving his opening remarks. You've got maybe 20 minutes before people start wandering around."
Daniel's computer was still logged in, a stroke of luck that probably said something about his overconfidence. I navigated to his email files, my hands shaking as I copied months of correspondence. The file names alone made my stomach turn. Labor cost optimization, inspection schedule management, subcontractor compliance issues. One email thread from just last week made me physically nauseous. From Daniel Carter to Tony Breslin regarding Riverside Phase 2. Tony, need to discuss the OSHA scheduling conflicts for next month. The inspector is new, doesn't understand how we operate. Can you handle this the way we handled the Martinez situation? Budget allows for the usual consultation fees. D. From Tony Breslin to Daniel Carter regarding Riverside Phase 2, consider it handled. Inspector Williams needs to understand that cooperation benefits everyone. I'll arrange a meeting. Jesus, I breathed, screenshotting the exchange. They were bribing OSHA inspectors and referring to firing Rosa Martinez as a situation they'd handled. How's it going up there? Marcus's voice was tense. Worse than we thought. They're not just cutting corners, they're systematically corrupting the entire oversight process. I found the financial folder and nearly gasped aloud. Spreadsheets showing precisely how much money they saved by underreporting worker hours, using substandard materials, and avoiding proper safety equipment. The Riverside project alone had generated an extra $2.3 million in profit through what they euphemistically called efficiency measures. Suzeth, Maria's voice carried barely controlled panic. Problem. Margaret just asked where the bathroom is on the executive floor. She's headed for the elevator. My blood turned to ice. How long do I have? Maybe 3 minutes? I frantically copied the financial files, watching the progress bar crawl across the screen with agonizing slowness. 47%, 52%, 58%. She's in the elevator, Maria reported. 65%, 71%. I'm almost there, I whispered, sweat beading on my forehead despite the air conditioning. 81%, 87%. The elevator dinged in the hallway. 92%, 96%, 99%. I yanked the USB drive free and dove under Daniel's desk, just as Margaret's heels clicked into the hallway. The familiar sound of her footsteps approached the office, paused outside the door. "Hello?" she called softly. "Is someone up here?" I held my breath, crammed into the knee space under the desk, praying she wouldn't investigate further. Through the glass wall, I could see her silhouette in the hallway, head turning as she scanned the executive floor. My phone buzzed with a text. In the dead silence, it sounded like a gunshot. Margaret's footsteps moved directly toward the office. Think, I whispered to myself, then had an inspiration. I pulled out my phone and called the building's main number. "Carter Development, this is the after-hours service?" "Hi, this is Margaret Carter. I'm at the charity gala downstairs, and I thought I heard something on the executive floor. Could you have security check it out?" "Of course, Mrs. Carter. We'll send someone right up." I hung up and texted Margaret from an anonymous number. "Building security is investigating a possible break-in on the executive floor. Please return to the gala immediately for your safety." Through the glass, I watched Margaret check her phone, frown,
then hurry back toward the elevator. The moment the doors closed, I burst from under the desk and sprinted for the stairwell. "I'm out," I gasped into my earpiece, taking the stairs 3 at a time. "Got everything. Files are worse than we imagined." "Thank God," Marcus replied. "Maria, can you get her out the back?" "Already waiting by the exit." "Suzeth, when you see what they're doing to people, are you ready for what comes next?" I thought about the workers at the community center, about the 800 families who would move into Daniel's dangerously constructed buildings, about Rosa Martinez and James Chent and everyone else who'd suffered while my family celebrated their corruption.
"Yes," I said, pushing through the exit door where Maria waited with a smile that mixed relief and determination. "I'm ready to burn it all down." As we walked away from the building, I could see the gala continuing through the windows. My parents and Daniel raising toasts to their success, completely unaware that their empire was about to crumble around them. The USB drive in my pocket felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds, heavy with the evidence that would destroy everything they'd built. And for the first time in my life, that destruction felt like justice. Grandmother Ruth's cottage sought like a peaceful refuge on the edge of the city, its wraparound porch and climbing roses a stark contrast to the gleaming towers of downtown, where I'd just committed what my family would surely call betrayal. I sat in her kitchen at 10 p.m. on a Saturday, the USB drive containing my family's secrets resting on the worn wooden table between us like an unexploded bomb. Ruth poured tea from a ceramic pot I remembered from childhood visits, her movements deliberate and calming, despite the magnitude of what I'd just confessed. At 78, she was the only family member who'd ever seen me as more than Richard's disappointing daughter or Daniel's jealous sister. "So," she said quietly, settling into the chair across from me, "you've found proof that your father and brother are exactly who you suspected they were?" "Worse," I replied, my voice hoarse from 2 hours of explaining everything. "They're systematically destroying people's lives for profit margins, and they're proud of it." Ruth sipped her tea, studying my face with the gentle intensity that had always made me feel understood. "Tell me what you're feeling right now, sweetheart." "Angry, heartbroken, terrified." I wrapped my hands around my mug, seeking warmth against the chill that had nothing to do with temperature, and guilty that it took me this long to act. "Guilt is a luxury you can't afford right now," Ruth said firmly. "You can spend years analyzing what you should have done differently, or you can focus on what you're going to do next." "Marcus wants to publish everything immediately. He says the longer we wait, the more people get hurt." I pulled out my phone and showed her the messages that had been flooding in since the gala. Maria texted me that 3 more workers got injured at the Riverside site yesterday. Faulty scaffolding that should have been replaced weeks ago. Ruth nodded slowly. "And what does your conscience tell you to do?" "Expose them. All of it. Let the city shut down their projects. Let the workers get justice. Let my parents face the consequences of their choices." But the word hung in the air between us. Ruth had always been able to see through my certainties to the doubts beneath. But they're still my family. Richard and Margaret raised me. Daniel is my little brother, even if he's become someone I don't recognize. Publishing this will destroy them completely. Will it? Ruth leaned forward. Or will it stop them from destroying others? I thought about the spreadsheets showing millions in profits from wage theft, about Rosa Martinez, fired for reporting safety violations, about the 800 families who would move into buildings constructed with shortcuts and bribes.
The question hit like a physical blow. Fear, I admitted. Fear that once I do this, I'll truly be alone. No family, no safety net, no place to go for holidays or help when life gets hard. Ruth reached across the table and took my hands in hers. "Suzeth, look at me. Her voice was gentle but unwavering. "Do you really think you'd be alone?" I thought about Maria, risking her job to help me access the building, about the workers at the community center, willing to trust me despite their suspicions, about Marcus, who'd believed in me when I barely believed in myself. "You've already built a family," Ruth continued, "a family based on shared values instead of shared blood, a family that sees your worth not because of your last name, but because of your choices." She was right. The people who'd supported me through this investigation had shown me more loyalty and respect than my biological family ever had. Your parents taught you that love comes with conditions, that acceptance requires silence about uncomfortable truths. But real love, the kind worth having, asks you to be your best self, even when it's difficult. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand. What if I'm wrong? What if I'm just getting revenge for years of being overlooked? Then you're getting revenge in a way that protects innocent people and holds powerful ones accountable. Ruth squeezed my hands. "Suzeth, your motives don't have to be pure for your actions to be right." We sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, the weight of the decisions settling around us. Through the kitchen window, I could see the lights of the city where hundreds of construction workers would wake up Monday morning and go to job sites that put their safety at risk for the Carter family's profits. "There's one more thing," I said finally. "Elena mentioned that if we publish now, it could trigger federal investigations, not just into Carter Development, but into the city officials who've been taking bribes. This could expose corruption all the way to the mayor's office." Ruth smiled for the first time that evening. "Your grandfather would have loved that. He spent 40 years as a union organizer fighting exactly these kinds of battles. He always said that sunlight was the best disinfectant." I pulled up Marcus's number on my phone, my thumb hovering over the call button. Once I made this call, there would be no going back. My family would know I'd chosen justice over loyalty, strangers over blood, truth over comfort. "I'm scared, Grandma Ruth." "Good," she said firmly. "Fear means you understand the stakes, but don't let fear choose for you." She nodded toward my phone. "Those workers are counting on you, not because you're perfect, but because you're willing to do what's right, even when it costs you everything." I thought about the last text I received from Margaret that afternoon. "Darling, your father wants to meet with you Monday morning. We're hoping to resolve this family matter privately." A family matter. That's what they were calling systematic worker exploitation and corruption. A matter to be resolved privately, quietly, with money and threats and whatever other tools they use to make problems disappear. But some problems shouldn't disappear. Some truths demanded to be spoken, no matter the cost. I pressed Marcus's number and lifted the phone to my ear. "Marcus, it's Suzeth. I've made my decision." The city courthouse steps buzzed with activity on Tuesday morning as local news crews set up cameras and reporters tested microphones. I stood behind the building's stone pillars, watching the scene unfold, while my stomach churned with anticipation and terror. In 30 minutes, I would destroy my family's reputation and probably my relationship with them forever. Marcus appeared at my elbow, carrying a folder thick with printed evidence. "The Times is running the full investigation tomorrow morning. 3 other papers are following up with their own pieces. This is going to be impossible to contain."
Through the crowd, I spotted familiar faces. Elena stood near the microphones, flanked by a dozen construction workers in their best clothes, ready to tell their stories to the world. Maria had taken the morning off from catering to be here, her presence a reminder of how many invisible people had suffered while my family celebrated their success. "You don't have to do this," Marcus said quietly. "I could run the press conference, keep you out of the spotlight." "No." My voice was steadier than I felt. "These people deserve to hear from me directly. They deserve to know that someone from the Carter family chose them over profit."
A black sedan pulled up to the courthouse, and my heart nearly stopped. Richard, Margaret, and Daniel climbed out, their faces grim as they surveyed the media circus. They'd obviously gotten word about the press conference, though they couldn't know exactly what I was about to reveal. Richard spotted me immediately, his eyes blazing with the kind of controlled fury I remembered from childhood confrontations. He strode over with Margaret and Daniel flanking him like bodyguards. "Suzette?" His voice could have frozen water. "I strongly suggest you reconsider whatever you think you're about to do here." "I've already done it, Dad." I held up a copy of tomorrow's newspaper, the headline stark in black letters. "Carter Development Exposed. Systematic Worker Exploitation and City Corruption Revealed." Margaret's face went white as she read the subheadline. "Family Member Provides Evidence of Wage Theft, Safety Violations, and Bribery." "You destroyed us," Daniel said, his voice barely controlled. "Your own family? For what? Some disgruntled workers who would sell you out for $1? For justice. For Rosa Martinez, who lost her job for reporting safety violations. For James Chen, who was fired for refusing to use broken equipment. For every worker whose wages you stole to pad your profit margins." "Those were business decisions," Richard snarled. "Decisions you have no understanding of because you've never built anything, never created jobs, never exploited people." I cut him off. "You're right. I never did that." Elena approached our group, her expression professional but determined. "Mr. Carter, I'm Elena Vasquez with the Worker Rights Coalition. We have some questions about the documents your daughter provided showing systematic wage theft and safety violations." Richard's facade cracked completely. "You have no right to harass my family based on fabricated documents." "The documents aren't fabricated," I said loud enough for nearby reporters to hear. "They're Daniel's own emails discussing bribing OSHA inspectors and retaliating against workers who file safety complaints." The media surge was immediate. Cameras swung toward us, reporters shouted questions, and suddenly we were surrounded by a hurricane of attention that Richard couldn't control or buy his way out of. "Is it true you fired workers for reporting safety violations?" a reporter called. "Did Carter Development pay bribes to city inspectors?" shouted another. "Miss Gordon, what made you decide to expose your own family?" I stepped forward to the microphones, my family behind me, and my chosen family, the workers, Aleda, Marcus, Maria, beside me. "My name is Suzette Gordon, and I'm here to tell you about the systematic exploitation and corruption perpetrated by Carter Development, the company owned by my father and run by my brother." My voice carried across the courthouse steps, amplified by speakers and captured by cameras. "Suzette, please." Margaret's voice was desperate. "Think about what you're doing to the family." I turned to face her, speaking directly into the cameras. "I am thinking about family. I'm thinking about the families of workers who've been injured on unsafe job sites, the families struggling to pay bills because their wages were stolen, the families destroyed by a company that values profit over human life." Daniel stepped forward, his face flushed with rage. "You self-righteous—"
"Mr. Carter," Elena interrupted smoothly, "would you like to respond to the documented evidence of your company's labor violations?" The questions came rapidly after that. Richard tried to maintain his composure, claiming the allegations were false and motivated by jealousy, but the evidence was overwhelming. Daniel stumbled through denials that contradicted his own written communications. Margaret stood silent, her polished facade crumbling as reporters pressed for comments about the family's knowledge of the corruption. When it was over, when the last question had been asked and the cameras finally stopped rolling, my family stood isolated while workers and advocates clustered around me with thanks and support. "This isn't over," Richard said coldly as they prepared to leave. "You've made your choice, Suzette. Live with the consequences." "I will," I replied. "And for the first time in my life, I'm proud of the choice I made." As their sedan pulled away, Marcus put his arm around my shoulders. "How do you feel?" I looked around at the faces surrounding me.
Maria beaming with pride, Elena already planning the next steps in the legal fight, workers who'd finally found their voices after years of silence. I thought about Grandmother Ruth, who'd taught me that real family was built on shared values, not shared blood. Free, I said finally. For the first time in my life, I feel completely free. The investigation that followed would topple city officials, send Daniel to prison for bribery and fraud, and force Richard to surrender control of Carter Development to a court-appointed oversight board. The workers would win their lawsuit, receive compensation for stolen wages, and see real safety improvements implemented across the industry. And I would build a new life based on the values I'd chosen over the family I'd been born into. A life where worth wasn't measured in profit margins, where love didn't come with conditions, and where standing up for justice was always the right choice, no matter the cost. Standing on those courthouse steps, surrounded by people who'd become my real family, I finally understood what it meant to be truly seen, truly valued, and truly home. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.